Georgia didn't get nicked by the hurricane.
Helene? Yes.
I
really
heard some
bad.
of it did.
It was pretty bad. A tree fell on my parents' house and they have a hole in the roof.
Oh.
Our town was without power for like 5 days, and 75% of the whole town's roads were blocked. So,
like flooded or just like there
you
was
still
debris?
got off less serious than some other places
absolutely.
farther north. Like, that's
Absolutely.
what's crazy about all of that, right?
Yeah,
Like, that
and-
sounds bad. It is bad. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
say it's not, but it's even worse elsewhere. That's
No, take a look at this on, I think it was Sunday, over the weekend in any event. I woke up in the middle of the night. I had no power. And so Georgia Power's not the thing. Oh yeah, power's down. We'll be back up in a couple hours. Didn't happen. Next thing you know, I get a text from AT&T saying cellular service is impacted because of Helene. And so it was all down for almost 12 hours a week after the storm.
Wow.
It was pretty insane. And even in my hometown, it's still like, some people have sent me pictures. It's just like one of my friends, her sister's house, tree fell on it. Their whole patio got knocked down. And trees. I mean, it's
is that
pretty bad.
farther north, your hometown?
It's further south. So
Oh, really? Wow.
It's a few hours south.
Huh.
And normally people escape there from Savannah.
Yeah.
Because that's
well-
inland, but it was bad.
Well, that's the thing that the direction the storm took was like. I would have figured it'd be more along the coast as it go up, but it was like
it was
right
inland. Yeah, and it
And
was.
they got
so
another
much
one
so-
coming in.
Yeah, Milton. I don't think it's supposed to come up to Georgia, but apparently Tampa, I think it's like a category 4 or 5, and Tampa is gonna get hit pretty hard, and that area's already been smacked.
Yeah, it's been raining for a couple days there before the storm even hits.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
what
road
happened
is
here.
saturated.
That's what happened here. Like I think we're supposed to get the storm on Thursday. That Wednesday, I went out and like ran errands because I was like, oh yeah, let me go ahead and go and do my thing or whatever. And on my way home, I was basically going like 5 miles an hour on like the highway because it was just coming down. I was, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, I didn't go. I was saving like the grocery store stuff for last. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there to get like some water and like flashlights, that kind of stuff, just to be safe, and like some, power bars or, granola bars, just stuff. So, but I went out and got it. But the day before it hit, it was like,
crazy.
It was really bad. And it wasn't even anything related to the hurricane. It was just like a storm front came through out of nowhere.
Yeah. Sometimes they push through ahead too.
Yeah. So
Oof.
it's pretty wild. So I feel bad for all those people, especially North Carolina. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Brian Dunaway lost power for days.
Yeah, they still haven't been able to do a show yet for Play Retro.
Yep.
Oh wow, still.
Yep.
Yeah. 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm always like of late the biggest power outages I've gotten are just storm related, like a tree lands on a power line.
Well, that's what happened, that took our power down because the ground was so saturated. A tree fell and we couldn't even really get in and out of our neighborhood because my neighborhood is small and it's like one huge cul-de-sac. And then like the street outside of it, that's where it was like blocked. So
30 seconds.
it was pretty bad.
Those are power outages that'll run your Tesla Powerwall down.
Have a good show, everybody.
Good day, Internet.
Good day, Internet.
Good day and hello, Internet.
Hey, Nica, how's it going?
It's going good. Sunny and 85 here in Atlanta today. So
Oh, it's almost the same. Sunny and 88 here in Los
Nice.
Angeles. Yeah. It's lovely. down from the 90s, although I think it's probably
Mid-90s.
going to top. It's going to hit over the top of 90 by the end of the day. But good stuff. That's Tom with weather, and now over to Roger on sports.
Something was thrown, something was hit, and something was scored.
That's
Somebody
right,
won.
Roger. How did your teams do over the weekend, Nica?
Surprisingly, my Cowboys pulled it out against the Steelers. Shocker.
Wow. That's like it's
Unfortunately,
1979 in here.
I know. Unfortunately, the Las Vegas Aces will not be able to go for their three-peat. They lost to the New York Liberty, so that was a bit of a bummer. But I still
Why-
have
now-
Connecticut in the game.
Why the Aces?
So the thing is, with especially the WNBA, I follow players
Not
more than
teams.
teams.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I like a lot of different. There are a handful of players that I really like. So I always have somebody to root for. So, so that's kind of my.
Because you've
My
got the
jam.
Atlanta Dream, but
I
you're not-
do.
Yeah.
I've been to a few games. They just recently got rid of their coach, so maybe some new greatness is coming. So maybe that'll
All right.
kind of pull me in. But yeah,
Well, if anybody's wondering why Nica is not a Falcons fan in the NFL, go listen to Snob OS back catalog. She explains it there. We've got tech news to get to. Are you ready?
Yep.
let's do it.
All right, let's go. Here we go. In 3, 2. Daily Tech News Show is made possible by you listening right now. Thanks to all of you, including Peter Bohack, Philip Less, Howard Yermish, and our brand new patron, Joe.
Yay.
Welcome, Joe. On this episode of DTNS, space telephone service comes for T-Mobile in North Carolina, what you need to worry about regarding 23andMe, and why Apple may abandon the yearly upgrade cycle. This is the Daily Tech News for Monday, October 7th, 2024 in Los Angeles. I'm Tom Merritt.
From the edge of Atlanta, I'm Nica Montford.
And I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
Technically, I'm as far from the center of Los Angeles as you are from the center of Atlanta, but that's just how wide Los Angeles is that I'm still in the city. That's crazy. Well, folks, the final ruling in Epic versus Google in the U.S. has been issued. The new rules where Google has to let third-party apps into the Google Play Store, allowed third-party billing, all of that stuff. The decision says that all begins on November 1st. So look for lots of cool new apps in your Google Play Store starting November 1st, in the United States anyway. Now to the rest of the quick hits. Wall Street Journal reports that Verizon, AT&T, Lumen Technologies, and a few other network providers were breached by malicious hackers thought to have originated in China. The report says the attack was discovered in the past few weeks, and attackers may have had access to the networks for months or longer. The areas infiltrated included the system used to fulfill law enforcement requests under the Patriot Act. It's unknown what method was used to gain access to the systems, how much access they had, and what, if any, systems were accessed. So they were in the system doesn't mean that they got the Patriot Act wiretap data, but they might have. We'll find out eventually, I suppose.
Maybe. A couple of Google-related rollouts. The $199 Galaxy A16 5G is the first Samsung Android phone to come up with a promise of 6 whole years of Android feature and security updates. It's believed to be the first phone in that price range to promote updates for that long. And the first people on the wait list are getting access to the Google's Ask Photos feature, which lets you use natural language to find photos in your library. When activated, it will work across your account, including both iOS and Android apps.
Very nice. During the Halo World Championships on Sunday, 343 Industries announced it's changing its name to Halo Studios because that's what they do. They make Halo. The Microsoft-owned developer is also moving from its own Slipspace engine, which is getting a little dated, they say, to use Unity's Unreal Engine. Company also showed demonstrations of Project Foundry, which is its research project into making Halo games on Unreal. It says it's been conducting those for several years. 343, nay, Halo Studios, Studios also said they're going to hire more developers. They're going to create multiple teams working on several games at once and use a centralized Unreal Engine pipeline to manage it all.
Philips updated its Hue app to include a 3D modeling tool that can show you what your room will look like under different lighting conditions. If you have an iPhone or an iPad with a LiDAR sensor, you can test up to 12 different Philips Hue products, including the Twilight Sunrise lamp, Dimera wall light, and Infuse ceiling light before you buy them. All Hue apps users get access to the Do Not Disturb mode that lets you set motion sensors to only react if all the lights in the zone are turned off.
And the largest publicly traded water and wastewater management facility in the U.S., American Water, told the SEC that it had shut down some of its systems Thursday because of a network systems breach. The company shut down its customer portal and paused its billing services, saying it will not issue late charges as a result. It shut down a few other systems, but it does not believe any of its actual water or wastewater facilities were impacted. So you're going to see the headline. You're going to jump to the conclusion that, they got into the water system. Doesn't appear they got into the water system. Looks like they got into billing systems and a few other systems. So feels more like a normal breach, but it's not good to be into utility systems at all. So that's why we're passing this one along. And that's a look at the quick hits. We have some better news than that coming up. The US Federal Communications Commission has given Starlink and T-Mobile special temporary authority to offer direct-to-cell satellite service in North Carolina to help aid in the recovery of the effects of Hurricane Helene. Emergency alerts have already started to be delivered through the service, meaning some people will get some information in areas where there is no cell service otherwise. SpaceX, which operates Starlink, said, "We may test basic texting capabilities for most cell phones on the T-Mobile network in North Carolina. SpaceX's direct-to-cell constellation has not been fully deployed, so all services will be delivered on a best effort basis." So, Nica, basically what they're saying is we can get emergency alerts to you, but we may not have the infrastructure quite yet to provide constant text message service between phones to everybody. But still, this is better than not having service, which is what a lot of these areas were suffering from.
Absolutely. I mean, being completely cut off from the entire country during a major storm where you really everything in some instances were completely wiped away. I will also throw in the fact that if you have iOS 18 for Apple iPhones, you can take advantage. And I saw on social media, a lot of people were taking advantage of the SOS messaging feature. Basically, if you don't have cell service, Apple taps into the satellites and allows you to message emergency personnel back and forth so that you can get some help, pinpoint your location. So it's one of those things where it's not a very sexy feature, but when something like this happens, It's like, oh my God, I'm so glad that I have this particular feature. But I think it just goes to show that the government is really pulling together different pieces to try and assist people in probably one of the most catastrophic hurricanes since probably Hurricane Katrina, and doing all the things that they can to help mitigate these issues and get people back online.
Now, I know Georgia wasn't hit as hard as North Carolina, and you're in Georgia. Sounds like you still got hit pretty hard there.
Yeah. My parents live a few hours away from here. In our town, 75% of the roads were blocked either because of power lines or water. A tree fell in my parents' house. They have a huge hole in the roof.
Oh, no.
And so, even, I've talked to people, in that area, and it's still completely, it's pretty bad down there to get people to get help. And if you're closer to the coast towards Savannah, it got even worse. But even up here through Atlanta, a week later, just over the weekend, I lost my power and my cell service from remnants of Hurricane Helene, and I was down without power and cell service for about 12 hours. So It's one of those things where while we particularly didn't get hit as hard, there are certain areas, even in the metro Atlanta area, that got hit hard. So it's one of those things where it really goes to show the power of the storm, and where it kind of hit, it completely missed some areas and, completely demolished others. So It's really sad. And there's another one coming up on the hills of Helene. So it's one of those things where I just hope people are prepared and safe and are out of harm's way as much as possible.
Yeah, it was good to see the regulatory agency leaping on this quickly. AT&T and Verizon have been objecting to this service, this cooperation between Starlink and T-Mobile, because they say it could cause ground interference with their own networks. And there is some validity to their concerns. Most of the people I've read seem to think that they may be exaggerating the concerns and that they are addressable. I think it was good of the FCC to say, I know there's concerns about this, but this is important. We need to make this happen now. And I wonder if it will actually ease the way forward because this is a system that is being put together and they're ramping it up past what it can do to provide some service. But in the future, you'll have multiple services, not just Starlink, but other satellite services and other cellular companies partnering with them, which means you can have this kind of capability, this kind of communication capability, even if power outages are even more widespread than they are in North Carolina and Georgia.
Right. And it may be one of those things that this may be included in the FEMA package now, that, they deploy it when something like this happens, just to have, backup to the backup in case, it goes down. So this may become a new standard. Yeah.
If the satellites are already in the air, the service is already in the air, then you just need to, drop the billing, compensate the company for its costs of operation and get information out to everybody.
Yeah.
Well, okay, from good news to not as good news. A lot of you may recall that 23andMe suffered a breach in December last year. The breach affected account data of around 6.9 million users. That's about half of 23andMe's customer base. Customer base is around 15 million. And at the time, I was quick to calm people to say, this is not a great breach, but it's your name, your birth year, your relationship labels with people, which is something you might not normally have in a breach of this kind. The percentage of DNA you share with a relative. So I'm, got the same 80% DNA, the same as my mom's, for example, so stuff like that. Some ancestry reports and whatever location you put in there. Most of that stuff is the kind of information you would have in most breaches. The relationship stuff is not. So it makes it a little more serious. It did not include genetic information, which I think a lot of people just seeing the headline would think, oh, it's 23andMe. Now they have everybody's DNA. They did not get that. Yeah. Still, a lot of family information. So I don't want to minimize the seriousness of the breach, but it wasn't that serious. The breach, combined with general declining interest in DNA kits, though, has caused 23andMe's revenue to continue to decline. It was declining before this breach. The breach certainly didn't help. In early September, independent directors resigned from 23andMe's board, citing a lack of faith in CEO Ann Wojcicki's plans to take the company private, saying it didn't look like she had the right plan to save the company. And then a New York Times story over this weekend kind of fanned the flames, pointing out that, well, in a desperate moment, they might sell their database to somebody, and then who knows what that company might do with your data. Nica, I look at this and I think, not that the New York Times is being irresponsible, but it's pointing towards something that's very much a might be. I think there's enough public pressure and enough public scrutiny, especially on 23andMe, that if they did have to sell to someone, that there's going to be a lot of attention paid to who is the buyer and whether that buyer should be allowed to buy it and what terms are on that database. So that database is probably safe from being sold to someone irresponsible because of that. More so, I'm concerned that 23andMe, because of its financial problems, won't have enough money or morale to make sure that your information stays safe and that an attacker could get into the database and get the data directly.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue. It's the what if. It's the what could happen. Because, it's one thing to say, you have my social security number, you have my PII data, you have my face scan from my iPhone or when I walk through the airport, or you have those types of things. And the one thing you don't have is my genetic matter. And that's kind of like the last piece of what makes up a person. And when you have the threat or the potential that last piece, the actual physical DNA matter that can be sold to God knows who, I think that really, inflames the situation. And it does allow, news agencies and organizations to, sensationalize it. And it, really turns people up. But as you mentioned, in this particular breach, there was no, breach of physical DNA matter. To me, it says, but what if? And I think that's where a lot of people are hung up on the what if part of this, because, who's to say what you can do with someone's actual genetic matter? And I mean, you never know. I mean, conspiracy theorists, let me put my tinfoil hat on. It's one of those things where I'm in the technology space, I'm in the data space, and it's one of those things where you never know what people are doing in their R&D, what they're creating, what they're thinking up. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh my gosh, for me, it's the what if. I would love to, do one of these ancestry things. I always wanted to do one, but I would never do it for the specific reason that my genetic matter could be exposed. So I think it's one of those things where, folks are a little, anxious and want to, make sure that their data, if they do have currently a 23andMe account, what to do to mitigate this or get them like, I want to off this space ride.
I think there's little generalized fear, uncertainty, and doubt around genetic data because people don't understand what it can and can't be used for. It can be used for a lot less than people think. I personally am not as worried as other people. And that's not to say I'm not worried, but I'm not as worried as other people about genetic data getting out there, partly because it's easier than ever to sync, to run someone's DNA. It's not hard to get a hold of people's DNA. If somebody really wants to get your DNA, they can. They just need to get, close enough to you to gather a small amount of genetic material and then run it. It's not impossible. No. I think the opposing viewpoint to me on that is, but 23andMe makes it real easy because you gave it to them, so they don't have to come and try and get it from you. So I think it's reasonable to be thinking, you know what? I'd rather put a speed bump in their way. I know they could get it. I'm not a high value target. Let's not make it easy for them to get it. I don't know what they can do with it either. But you can.
I'm not going to help them.
And I think that's reasonable. You can delete your data by going to settings, 23andMe data, select delete your data. They'll send you an email to confirm it's you asking to delete your data. You can confirm it. And then 23andMe says it will only keep the personal data required to by law. That means business records. That means like, oh, we had you as a client, so we will keep your name and that you paid us at this date, and even records that you deleted it. But they will get rid of the genetic data, they say, and they will destroy the samples. That will also happen if you delete your account as well. So you could just delete the whole account. But you could actually delete your data without getting rid of some of the account information if you're not too worried. If you're not as worried about the account information because some of it's already out there, maybe you want to keep that. You've got options if you want to get rid of this. But I do think it's smart to play it on the safe side. I wouldn't panic about it though. It's because I don't know if it's as highly valued and useful as you think. A lot of smart people though are pointing out that deep learning is getting better and better about figuring stuff out. I still don't know what you would use mass DNA data for that would harm me directly, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
You're going to clone me and make multiple versions of me.
I don't think we're close to that. But again, if you want to make sure that you're as far away from that as possible, you can delete your data.
I don't want to make it easy for you.
If you have feedback about anything that gets brought up on the show, you can get in touch with me or my clone on social media at DTNS Show on X, at DTNS Show at mstdn.social on Mastodon, at Daily Tech News Show on TikTok, and DTNS Pix, DTNS PIX on Instagram and Threads. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman sources say Apple will announce M4-powered 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro models, an M4 iMac, and a new M4 Mac Mini around the end of this month, around the end of October. Just as everybody has suspected. Gurman saying, and he's good at this stuff. You're probably right. He also expects there might be a refreshed iPad mini in the mix, and that most of the announcements will ship November 1st. Few of them might slip till later in November. None of that is particularly surprising to me. We've been talking about this, hearing about this. There's often a fall announcement with iPads and Macs, so it wouldn't be shocking to see this. What's more interesting in Gurman's column is his identification that Apple is moving away from a yearly release model for more products. Older products don't get yearly upgrades, so we don't get a new MacBook Pro every year, but the most popular ones, like the iPhone, like the Apple Watch, do. And the operating systems always do. The cadence is, right? WWDC, they tell us what's going to be in the new operating systems. The betas come out for the developers, then they come out for the consumers, and then in the fall, they release the new operating system updates, and that comes along with the new iPhone and the new watch and the new iPad and the new Macs, right? That's the cadence, right, Nica?
Right.
Like you're used to that. Yeah.
Yep.
Gurman thinks they're moving away from that. He points out that the Apple Watch Ultra didn't get an upgrade this year, that the Apple Watch SE also skipped an upgrade this year. He thinks those are moving to a 2-year refresh cycle. And bigger than that to me is he thinks the delayed rollout of Apple Intelligence is a sign of things to come, that the big OS upgrades will not launch with all their features at once anymore in order to make sure that those features are ready when they are launched. So not that we won't get fall point upgrades, version upgrades, but that features might start to roll out continuously throughout the year instead of all coming in the fall. What do you think?
So for me, I honestly think Apple Intelligence, I think they probably planned for it to actually come out in the fall announcement, and it just wasn't ready. I don't think it's some grand master plan to reconfigure the way that Apple announces its things. I personally don't think so. I just think Apple Intelligence wasn't ready. But I personally, I don't think that I like the piecemeal kind of rollout. Give me a heads up if you're going to say, you know what, we plan to release, features 1 through 5, in October. And then, we're going to do some other features down the line. Sure. But I think, completely pivoting on the way that they roll things out. I don't know. I'm a little suspicious with that concept. I don't know if, that plan of a concept is nailed down.
In defense of this plan, if it is indeed the plan, which, Gurman's suspecting it might be the plan, which for Gurman is saying, like, I get the sense, not somebody told me. But it would make sense if Apple, let's say you're right, Apple Intelligence was supposed to come out along with the phones. It wasn't ready. They made what I would call a good call of like, don't push it out when it's not ready yet.
Absolutely.
Wait till it's ready and put it out when it's ready. That could be the impulse for them to say, we should just make that the policy, is that, we'll upgrade the platform capability and the security. I guess security updates come regularly, but we'll update the platform's capabilities in the fall, but new features like this we'll just push out when they're ready. Like this could be the inspiration for them to do that.
It could be. I mean, I don't completely disagree with his premise. It could be that way. For me, kind of, just like the piecemeal version of features kind of just coming out, out of the blue. It definitely steps away from the ethos of Apple being very controlled, being very intentional with how they release their products. To me, it feels a little bit too loosey-goosey for Apple. Maybe they're changing, maybe they're evolving, but to me, it just seems outside of the Apple standard and their typical, straight line, this is how we do things. Now, what I wouldn't be disappointed at if this kind of rolled over into like Apple announcements. We've talked on our show, some of these things that they're, announce in these big events could have been an email, could have been a video posted on the website, something going on social media, say, hey, we have this new piece of hardware. It's out there, go for it, rather than, piling stuff into a physical event or a virtual event just to kind of fill out the time. I would prefer if they would streamline the events.
I'm
not
with you.
put some of the things in there that, honestly, who cares?
And they have been doing that. I mean, that's a side note to this conversation, but it's October 7th. if Apple's going to have an announcement for Macs by the end of October, we should be hearing about it pretty soon, right? So it could be that there won't be, that they will just do what they've done a couple of times where they just put out a video. They don't schedule an announcement. They just drop a video. It's like, here's the new Macs. It's a 15-minute video. Enjoy, which I love personally, like what you're saying. Or they could just drop a press release. I think press releases are usually saved for spec upgrades. And I guess these could be spec upgrades, but with an M4 chip, I feel like they're going to want to talk about the M4 chip more. So I would suspect that they might just come out with a video on these and not do a big event. But what's interesting to me is that we had an iPad OS update that is out and available, and there was no new iPad to go with it. Mm-hmm. I could see, and that's the other thing that Gurman's talking about, this becomes, well, the iPad OS update won't come out on the same day as all the other updates. We'll bring it out when there is a new iPad to go with it. Or the iPad OS update comes out in September, but one of the new features launches with the new iPad that we're announcing, so that they are coming at the same time. I could see them doing that. I mean, it's not like Apple hasn't launched features throughout the year. They do add features throughout the year, but I think Gurman's saying it's going to be more than just that. It's going to be more than just some new features come later after the announcement. That it's no longer going to be main point upgrade, has most of the stuff, and you might get some more features throughout the year. It would be a regular cadence. And I'm like you, I want to know what that cadence is. If that's going to become the policy, I would like a little more, view into how is this going to happen? When am I going to get what?
Right. Completely agree.
Which is not how Apple does things.
No.
So,
as I said, it's a little too loosey-goosey. I don't know if they're going to be into that.
But I'm fine with that on the OS side. I don't know if Gurman is saying we're going to get away from he's saying like we're going to still have a new iPhone every year. So clearly we'll have a new iPhone in September. I don't know if that means that the Macs go on to do a different cadence. Maybe they do. It does seem like the only major change that he's identifying here, to me anyway, seems to be that operating system situation where the updates come as the features are ready, unless we'll do most of them at a time and then we'll trickle out a few the rest of the year.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah. Let us know what you think and what you would like to see in the mailbag. Feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com. We do a top 5 on our YouTube channel, and last week I counted down the top 5 smartphones from before the iPhone, and got a lot of great responses to these on our Patreon. For example, Charles says, "I still have my Palm Trio and it still works. I bought a new battery a few years ago. A single charge lasts weeks. It didn't last as long when it still had cell service, though." But yeah, now that it can't connect to a network, that battery lasts a long time. Shows you how much juice those modems use trying to connect to networks, right?
Yeah.
And then Bo said, for me, it was the Hitachi G1000 Windows phone, launched back in 2003. Rotating camera and touchscreen, plus could RDP straight from the phone. Paid for itself pretty quick, as I could remote in for billable hours anytime, anywhere. Now we have whole like websites devoted to helping you cut down from having to remote in for billable hours anytime, anywhere. But back then it was a perk because you couldn't do it. Yeah. Well, Nica, thank you so much for hanging out today. It was great talking to you.
As always, it's a good time being on with you guys.
Where can folks go to find more of what you're doing?
You can pretty much find me on all your social media outlets at Tech Savvy Diva. You can also check out my podcast, Snob West Podcast, where we talk all things Apple and then some, along with me and my co-host, Terrence Gaines.
Fantastic. Patrons, stick around for the extended show, Good Day Internet. Was the 1800s media worse than what we have now? The Smithsonian's political history curator points out some parallels that include widespread misinformation and influencers run amok in the 1860s. Hey, some things never change. You can also catch the show live Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC. Find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. Back tomorrow. Talk to you then.
DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
All right. Good show, Nica. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was fun.
If you are watching or listening live, go to showbot.tv/DTNS2. Weird Ami leading the votes right now to submit titles. 23andMe and the Nigerian Prince. What are you trying to imply there, Weird Ami? There's also Fred819's 23 and Flee. Like FLEE.
Oh, that's funny.
Get out of there. Yeah. So get over there if you're watching or listening live and vote on them. Wisdom Hallmark in our I believe is in the YouTube chat. Is that right? Is just not having it with Mark Gurman. It's like what they always do. Apple always trickles things out. They don't have a yearly upgrade cycle. So your mileage may vary on whether you think Gurman is onto something there or not. All right, let's talk about this Conversation article, how a newspaper revolution sparked protesters and influencers, disinformation, and the Civil War. It's a great read. Highly recommend you go read it. It's by John Grinspan. He's the political history curator at Smithsonian Institution. And what he's pointing out is that in the mid-1800s, we were having an information explosion. So everyone thinks like, oh, the printing press came around in the 1500s. You know, by the 1800s, every city had, you know, a couple of newspapers, and maybe three in the big cities. And then it declined, and then newspapers went out of business in the late 20th century. And now we're down to one newspaper per town. That's a misimpression. The number of papers in 1800 was a handful in the United States. And remember, when we're talking about the United States in the year 1800, we're really talking about the Eastern Seaboard. So there are a handful of publications, probably most of them in New York, maybe a few in Philadelphia, not many elsewhere. By 1860, there were 4,000.
Wow.
And by 1860, you've got a bigger country, certainly, but that's a big increase. Yeah. Some cities like Boston and New York had dozens of daily newspapers. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Did you, before we started talking about this today, did you realize that?
I didn't realize they had that many back then.
Uh-huh.
I didn't it's like, I mean, okay. That's a lot. So within the span of a lifetime, you go from like, maybe your city has a publication to dozens of daily newspapers. And nearly everyone read at least one of them. He writes, from wealthy elites to schoolgirls, enslaved people technically banned from reading, even read the daily newspapers. And there was no journalistic integrity. There was no journalism is about fairness and balance. They published scandals. They published rumors. They riled up mobs. They attacked each other's editors. They were directly affiliated with political parties. 95% of newspapers in the 1860s were explicit in their political affiliation. Like now we get all worked up because one of these TV networks has a pretty obvious bias, right? But if you ask any of the TV networks, they'll be like, no, we're fair and balanced. Like, we're neutral.
Yeah. 95% of the newspapers in 1860 were like, oh no, we're directly tied to the Whig party or whatever it was. This one got me. I didn't realize this one. They would print the election ballots in the paper.
That's crazy.
In these partisan papers, and you would vote by cutting the ballot out of the newspaper and take it to your polling place. So again, if you're like, wait a minute, ballot security, there was none.
Zero.
Yeah. He also talks about the telegraph arising in the 1840s, and that kind of supercharged all this because the telegraph allowed you to get information faster. Mm-hmm. So you had all these newspapers, and they could find out what was going on, across the continent immediately. Whereas before it took the time of the horse, like however long a horse could take to get there, or maybe a train. That's how fast news traveled. With the telegraph, traveled instantly. And of course, the effect was, tell me if this sounds familiar, Nica, news went from being a local affair where you were concerned with your local events to a national affair where you were more concerned with your national events.
Oh my gosh, I never heard of that before.
It's a weird world they had in the 1800s. And so that is directly attributed to the rise in the dispute over slavery pre-Civil War, is that prior to this explosion of publications, people just didn't really know what was happening in other states. So they didn't care as much. With the telegraph and all these newspapers, suddenly everybody's reading about what's happening all the time. There is a nice little parallel that he dug up. There were a lot of young people reading the newspaper. We think of the newspaper as like, oh, that's what grandpa does, right? He reads the newspaper. Back then, the newspaper was this hot new media. So it was the young people who used it. It was the young people who wrote it. And you had influencers rise up around the newspapers. One of the big groups was called the Wide Awakes. Present tense, not woke, but wide awake.
Not past tense, but they were current. The
parallels striking. The Wide Awake Club exploded across the national newspaper network. Within months of their founding, young Republicans were forming clubs from Connecticut to California to put pressure on Democratic papers in their cities. Again, remember, papers, not a paper, multiple papers. Okay. There were marches, there were protests, there were write-in campaigns. Then, of course, there was a backlash from the Democratic papers to paint the Wide Awakes as being radicals who were arming themselves. And, just blowing everything into a big conflict, which of course happened. Now, this historian is not trying to say the rise of newspapers caused the Civil War, but he is pointing out that it definitely contributed to the ability to increase tensions and increase awareness and increase conflict. And he says, what began in ink spiraled into lead and steel. It took 16 years to develop from the introduction of the telegraph to the Civil War. Undoubtedly, the fight over slavery caused that conflict, but the newspapers fed it, amplified it, and exaggerated it. Mid-19th century Americans lived with an odd combination, an unprecedented ability to spread information, but also a siloed and partisan system of interpreting it. It helped the nation finally reckon with the crimes of slavery, but also spread bad faith, irrational panic, and outright lies. This history can add a needed perspective to today's political conflicts, so often magnified by social media. In both eras, new technologies supercharged existing political tensions. Yet we can see from this heated history that political media is less like an unstoppable, unreformable force that will consume democracy and more like another in a succession of breathtaking, catastrophic, wild new landscapes that must be tamed. So he doesn't really end with the it'll be all right, but he does say it's not impossible.
It's interesting because the effects of it were felt all the way up through the 60s, 70s, or all the way up through the 80s even. It's just the amount of, I think, influence was directly proportional to a pocketbook of how you could you could pay for coverage. Wasn't William Randolph Hearst was famous for saying about the Spanish-American War, you provide the details, I'll provide you the war with. That's
a separate topic to his history here. And I would hate to try to work that into what he's saying. It's not what he's talking about. But I think my best guess, Roger, is by the time that happens in the early 1900s, you're seeing the consolidation of these newspapers. In the 1860s, it's wide open. Anyone can publish, relatively speaking. And so it's with World War I and the Spanish-American War before it that you're starting to see the effects of consolidation. And it is interesting to note that one of the highest levels of consolidation starts to happen in the 50s. And that's when you start to get these ideas of journalistic integrity and being balanced and not injecting yourself into the story. Whereas in the 1860s, when you have the widest playing ground with the most number of voices, you have none of that. You have nobody talking about journalistic integrity. Everybody just wants to read the paper that reflects the way they feel.
And talk about cyclical. I mean, we're in 2024 and it's some extreme parallels from the 1800s. I mean, you talk about it being wide open. Anybody with a podcast mic or an internet connection.
Yeah, any
Or a
crazy
social media
couple,
you know,
3
handle.
people will. Yeah.
Well,
You got
you know,
Substack, you got Medium, you have it's the only really difference is the type of technology that's used.
Yeah.
Before they had printing press. Now we have the internet. So it's one of those things where it's basically it's like almost exactly the same thing.
The technology is advanced. The people, maybe not so much.
No. And that's why I always, when people say, the next generation will be better. And you hear people talk about, if history is bound to repeat itself. This is the history that's repeating itself. We didn't learn anything from it.
Well,
I don't know if that's true. I think we do learn more. I think we learn more than we give ourselves credit for because we didn't live through the previous eras. And I think there is some carryover where you don't have as serious events happen, but they seem more serious because they come from a period of calm. And it's hard to make that argument because it sounds like you're minimizing the current events, but you're not. What I'm trying to say is like it was a lot more extreme back then, and we're seeing it get extreme again. And it's too early to call, right? Maybe you're right. Maybe it will get more extreme, but usually even the 60s was less extreme than the teens, but nobody studies the teens. Nobody talks about the teens anymore, right? And a lot of people compare now to the 60s, but the people who lived through the 60s, when you talk about it, they're like, oh yeah, it was worse. Like, people died on campuses. They didn't just get beat up on campuses. Well, and it's like neither one of those are good, but there does seem to be some small amount. Maybe I'm just being a Pollyanna.
We have some guardrails. We do.
Maybe some small amount of learning gets carried on.
I will say that people tend to look at history through popular culture. So when you think of things like the Civil War, you often think of the battlefields and the fights that they fought, but you don't hear about the riots that happened in New York during the Civil War because of conscription. And so, there's a lot of things going on, but we don't take in all of it. We take in just a very
and everybody who was there is gone, so they can't stand up and tell you.
And that was like my friend was making this argument, like, things happen in cycles because the people who remember, who lived through a previous time of unrest, the next generation sort of in a way kind of has to relearn it because it's
I think that's the point that Nica's making. It sounds like to me is that we keep having to relearn the lesson.
Having to relearn it. We have the historical, context, the facts in some cases, and it's like like you said, we are having to relearn it every single time. My grandma turned 91 in September, and we were at her birthday brunch, and I was asking her, I was like, you've seen a lot in your time growing up in small town Georgia. And I was like, is this the worst you've ever seen it? Or was it worse before? She was like, this is the worst I've ever seen it. She was talking about the political climate and the state of information. She said, she's like, I've never seen anything like this. And I was like, naming off names of people and types of events. And she's like, no, she's like, this is just, she's like, it's something I never thought that we would be here and we would see this type of thing. And she was just like, it's in my 91 years, she's like, this is probably the worst I've seen it. And it's the fact that I don't think, like you said, we are really learning from each time this happens. Again, cyclical, because these things happen. There are different types of events. There's different types of mediums that this comes through. But at the core of it, a lot of these things, these ideas, these movements are the same, just repackaged a little bit differently, and we're still going through it every single time.
I mean, it's weird because technology has made news, and information so omnipresent, it's really easy to get an idea of what's happening on the other side of the country, if not from the other side of town.
As well as a misimpression of how often
Exactly.
it's happening.
Well, my parents lived through a civil war, but the way you talked about it, they never experienced it because when they moved, they weren't part of the rush of refugees. They were like sort of at the leading edge of it. It's like, we better get out of town before things get really, but you don't get that. You don't get the everyone running for the exit screaming, grabbing whatever they could, because that's only a portion of that experience. It, depending on where you are in these situations, I've talked to vets who worked security in Vietnam, and they didn't see any real combat, but they heard or they saw the effects when soldiers came through, but they personally themselves were not,
I think
with it.
that's an interesting point to consider. Yeah, and if I could lay it out like this, in the 1600s, if you're at the leading edge of escaping from a civil war, you might hear some stories from people later about it. But mostly you just feel like, whoo, I got away. In the 1800s, you're at the leading edge of getting away from a civil war, and you read about it, and it feels like you had a closer escape than it would have 300 years before because you're reading about it. But it still didn't happen to you, right? In the 20th century, you're at the leading edge escaping from a civil war. You see it on TV and you feel like, man, I just barely made it out. Like, look, you can see what's happening to the people who didn't make it out on television in real time. And now in the early 21st century, you're escape on the leading edge of a civil war and you are in constant communication with everyone who's still caught in it, and you're going through it with them. And so you don't feel as much of the relief because you're living. Everyone is
you're
living
in survival
with
mode.
Everyone else.
It feels like you're in survival mode almost. Like every generation, you're in survival mode, and you're just trying to make it through. And
yeah. But in every example, in every example I gave, I was trying to set it up that it's the same exact thing happening.
Every
but it's
time.
what
It's
you
the
know
medium.
about it that changes. Yeah.
How you inform.
When you have social media give you almost a historically, unknown level of intimacy, you vicariously live out
Minute by minute. It is.
It's weird. It's weird to think, because if you look back, there was a great series on PBS about the home front, about the U.S. during World War II, and how banal and just how very average and unassuming it was, because people worked in factories and they built equipment and war material, but they didn't see what happened to it. They just put it on trains or got on ships and went over to.
They did their part. They turned their screw. And
talking to my grandparents, it was unsettling. They described it as hard because they still had the little red chips that you use to get your meat. You couldn't just go to the grocery store and buy meat. You had to, there was rationing on, and there was emphasis to collect certain amounts of things, to donate to the war effort, rubber and metals and things. So it's like, it's your perspective. For them, it was like, it felt hard because it was harder than it was before. But in retrospect, it sounds like it's banal because they weren't seeing the direct effects.
Well, and
but it's about information. Yeah. They also weren't able to see what was happening other than in a newsreel, where you saw some bombers fly over and drop some bombs.
And I mean, you have to understand the U.S. at the time was just coming out of the Depression. So depending on where you were financially, JFK famously said he never, even though he lived through the Depression, he had to read about it to understand what was going on because he personally himself. And so
the rationing affected most everyone. Probably didn't affect JFK either, but
it's also true, and it's also the propaganda.
Well, he was in the war, so he was on a boat.
And we're talking about the news and how information is disseminated depending on where you lived, your economic class, your status. That sometimes affect what you saw or what you heard and the way that it was presented to you. So it's one of those things where it really is a unique lived experience, even though we're doing it collectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where we're all in it, but we're in it at different
time. Well, you know,
levels
that's
and viewpoints. That
the
type
way
of thing.
to go back to the like are we relearning the lessons. The parallels with the 1800s to me that he points out are really interesting because we did learn how to deal with newspaper misinformation. For good or ill, however we did it, we don't have a problem with newspapers, right? Newspapers are not the issue. It isn't that I would throw out there that maybe it isn't that we didn't learn our lesson. It's that we solved this problem and a new one came up, and it's different. It's a parallel problem, and I think that's what he's pointing out. Is like, I'm not trying to say they're the same. It's a parallel problem, but it takes a different approach to solve that one than you had to solve, even though it's the same
last
kind
one.
of problem. Yeah.
The last one, you have to solve it a different way.
Yeah.
People learn and adapt, and things change, and you have to.
I mean, once we get broad telepathy to one another, that's going to be a whole new.
Oh, I don't know, man. That could go either way.
I mean, but it
that could be bad.
I mean,
what you think?
it is. I mean, it's a very curious, not curious, but a very interesting kind of evaluation of how societies. I mean, not just American. Like, I mean, it's
he's the political curator at the Smithsonian, so he's talking about American history because that's what he knows. But you're right. Yeah, it wouldn't just have to be this.
But every time I hear people say like, "Well, how could people follow that person and do such and such?" It's like, there's a
take
mentality.
a look around now.
I mean, and it's. I think the less we think of it as it could never happen and understand why things happen, I think goes a long way, because I think what happens is there's a sort of, maybe not carelessness, but you tend to be very ambivalent about things because you believe they can't happen, like a disaster, right? Like, oh, this disaster will never happen here. I don't need to stock up on water or food, to carry me over through a week or two.
Or you think we're better than this. We've grown and we're evolved. We're better than this. These things of the past. They can't,
I think a big I think a big important part of that is when we think we're better than this, it's because we think we can recognize the problem, right? But the problem never looks the same.
Yeah.
And so when the problem comes and you're like, you either say, well, it's not like that problem, then maybe you dismiss it and you don't try to solve it when you need to. Or I think just as often we say, that's that problem, the same problem again, and we try to apply the solution that worked, and it's not the same problem, and the old solution doesn't fix it. Yeah. So you have to recognize that, when you say like, well, that's just like Napoleon, like, it's not. And trying to act like it's Napoleon is not going to fix it. You're going to have to identify that it's a different thing. Not to mention that everyone who followed someone that you're like, how could they have possibly fallen for that line of thinking, wouldn't fall for it now. But
I'm too smart for that.
Right. But that's because no one knew that line of thinking was as problematic in the ways that it was problematic as it is.
And it would lead to where it's led.
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when new problems come along and someone's like, that looks like this to me, and the people following it go, no, it's different. Well, then you haven't convinced them. So you have to convince them the problem with the current problem, not just call it like, oh, well, that's Genghis Khan. And you're like, yeah, that's not going to work.
They're not rolling around on horses. They're on.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Like if we're like, that person is the Genghis Khan of the modern age, the people who want to believe that person will say like, they don't ride horses. And then, you will have no influence over them from that on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because a lot of these movements are heavily focused on they all work based on an emotional level, which is why they're so successful, and why you see people you think otherwise to be intelligent maybe not fall for it, but they sort of get enraptured because they're not working on a rational level of thinking. I remember one individual I used to work with, like totally smart person, but as soon as you got into this one topic, they would just like, nope. It's just this one way, and that's
And
the
that
only
person's name was Roger Chang.
way. Oh.
No, I know what you mean, but I say that jokingly because we all need to remember that we can be that person.
Oh yeah,
You know,
totally.
we may be the person who's following the line of thinking that we think is personally reasonable. So that's why I like the way Andrew Heaton puts this. He says, I generally assume that I'm wrong about 50% about what I believe. I just don't know which 50%. So I'm always looking to see like indications that like, oh, I need to adjust my thinking about that. And the 50% is not a precise number. It's just a way of him expressing like, I know I'm wrong about stuff. I just don't know what I'm wrong about. So you always have to keep that in mind. I think that's a healthy way of thinking about things.
It's kind of like what we were taught in government class. Just like you really need to be circumspect about everything, and often what you might be saying initially isn't the whole story, and you really need to spend the effort to learn as much as you can.
Yep.
And
There's
also,
my
Stay
mayor.
informed.
I mean, Mayor
stay
Lang.
informed, but not through one of the 25 daily newspapers in your town that has a direct political affiliation.
You know, I wouldn't even know where to find a newspaper.
Stay
in
informed
my
with
town.
some critical thinking. You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
And recognizing that no one person or no one entity has all the answers, and no one entity or one group of people is 100% right.
Yep.
100% of the time.
Ridiculous.
That's wisdom right there. I was walking the dog early in the morning because we got a puppy, so we get up earlier. And there was a newspaper on someone's lawn. I was like, look at that.
I haven't seen
still
anyone.
happens. Yeah.
When was the last time?
I don't
someone-
even know where
very
you
thin.
would get a newspaper from.
I mean, all I get are
That guy's lawn.
all I get are like supermarket flyers.
They have them at the Ralphs here in LA. You can get LA Times, and I think like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal too. Like they have them by the entrance.
I use the web browser. I should probably touch paper.
That works too.
though. Touch
Yeah.
paper.
Especially but you have to have a subscription though. If you don't have a subscription, then you can only.
Well, it's not
read
like
the
I
first
could just
paragraph.
take it from Ralph. Well, can I? No, I
No,
gotta pay
well,
him
you
later.
probably could get away with it. I don't know if they'd stop you, but you're not supposed to. You're
Come back with
supposed to
that
pay
LA
for it.
Times.
Frowned upon.
Yeah. I tried going into the grocery store complaining about the paywall for all the groceries, and they didn't seem very sympathetic to that argument.
Yeah.
Why are you putting all your food behind a paywall?
Yeah. I need to access it. I need to see it. No.
How come they don't let you collect or stamps? Those little things you got,
Eagle
like
stamps.
you fill out a sheet
Yeah.
and then you get discounts and stuff.
We talked about that a while back
Yeah.
on GDI. I can't remember what we found though, but I think
it's-
they're still around in some form.
It was
somewhere.
I remember all the way up through like 81 was the last time I saw.
They
one
were
of those.
basically the prototype for collecting information about you, because you would hand in the book and it would give them your address and it would show how much you shopped over what period of time. Now they don't need to do that. They just track you when they ring
When
you
you
up
type
on
in your phone number.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they give you rewards so you always come back.
Right.
Exactly. They're paying you. They're paying you for your
Are they
data.
paying me or are they giving me the illusion of a discount?
Well, try not giving them your phone number and you'll pay more. So there you go. It's,
You know what? If you're really nice to the
Half empty
the
or half full.
cashier,
Yeah,
should
that's true, actually.
She pulls out her own and she's
It's like, I got you. You just say you forgot.
That woman must shop.
You got to go to a
like
different cashier every time so they don't catch on to you.
$25,000 worth of groceries every month on her card.
Getting all the
man.
points off at the gas station.
Yeah.
Oh, I use Costco. Costco's the cheapest gas in town.
I just don't drive. Not much, anyway. All right. Well, Nica, thank you so much for being here. It was great having you.
Always good to be on with you guys. It's really good time.
Indeed. Hey, folks. Like I said, we had a great conversation on our Patreon about that top 5. I mean, I always talk about the top 5 being on YouTube and and TikTok and all of that. But we actually posted on the Patreon as well, which if you're a subscriber, you know. So it was good to see Bill and Anon Jr. and Lord Mulgar is in there commenting on Roger's column, and Howard and a bunch of others commenting RW on the top 5 and all the other things at patreon.com/DTNS. That's going to do it for us. Until tomorrow, everyone, have a good day. There was no good day internet from you, Roger.
Good day, internet.
Good day, internet. It's not too late.
That's all right.
Good day.
We're
good
still
day.
live, and we have to pick the titles. But I want to thank all the YouTube viewers and the Twitch viewers. In fact, Lion Jim Video has been doing the on-screen celebrations a bunch. It's fun to watch. Tom says, "Go Chiefs." Resubscribed for the 20th month. Happy Monday. Defeat those Saints. Says Tom, who says "Go Chiefs," which is not me. It's a different Tom. We've had this conversation. Tom says "Go Chiefs" is a great guy. Thanks for subscribing. PC Milesy cheered us with 50 bits. Pixeled followed us. Zoe cheered us with 4 bits. Larry in Atlanta resubscribed with Prime for the 47th month. Elijah Video did a message effect as well. We got Future Proof 4, Master 10, NH Photog, Trash Rabbit, DBFM Radio, Wildcat 007 all followed us on Twitch. Thanks, everybody, for being with us there. Let's go to showbot.tv/DTNS2. Our top vote getter is still Fred819 with 23 and Flea.
I love it, but
That's not what you used, is it?
No.
One more thing. No annual releases from BioCare. Cell service from the stars. Does Apple have a concept of a plan? They're Halo. That's what they do. Roger, what'd you go with?
I went with Zoe's rumors of new Apple release strategy.
Ah, very nice. All right, for GDI, top vote getter is from Batfink with one of those influencers was a young John C. Dvorak. True story.
I'm trying to remember when I remember John C. Dvorak as young.
He was not young in the 1860s. I'm guessing he was not alive, although I don't know for sure.
Maybe he's like Merlin. He goes backward in time.
Could be. Stealth Dave, all this has influenced before and all this will influence again. GPEG84, I like this one. Misinformation has been around as long as people.
Or GPEG had 84 had another one. Misinformation never gets old. Genghis Khan of Tech from Stealth Dave.
Hindsight is 1850 from Lion Jim Video. Oh, that's
funny. That's funny.
That one's really good.
Genghis Khan, a motorcycle. G. James B.
Media history continues to rhyme. Good one, Lion Jim. Should we go with Hindsight is 1850?
Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's good.
Where'd it go? I just saw it there.
Lion Jim Video. Good one. All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Apple Vision Show is coming up shortly. There might be a little bit more of a delay today, mostly because the host of that show is my wife, and we have to cover our dog with a broken toe, so it's not as easy as a handoff. But stick around. Apple Vision Show coming up on Twitch and on YouTube shortly. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.